Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Have a great day.
The topic of this after-hour session is the doctor's opinion. But I got to tell you, I'm not much for telling jokes, but they say you're supposed to start off every talk with a joke. So I'm sort of like Kevin. I was a nerd, so the only thing I figured I could do was I went out to the internet, and you know what I found on the internet? I found the official world's funniest joke. This was on CNN.com last week. It says the byline is London, England. The world's funniest joke has been revealed after a year-long search by scientists. In an experiment conducted in Britain, people around the world were invited to judge jokes on an internet site as well as contribute their own. The Laugh Lab research carried out by psychologist Dr. Richard Wiseman from the University of Hertfordshire attracted more than 40,000 jokes and almost 2 million ratings. And here it is. 2 hunters are out in the woods and one of them collapses. He doesn't seem to be breathing and his eyes are glazed. The other guy takes out his cell phone and he calls 911. He gasps, "My friend is dead. What can I do?" The operator says, "Calm down. I can help. First, let's make sure he's dead." There's a silence. Then a gunshot is heard. Back on the phone, the guy says, "Okay, now what?" I want to know who studied jokes for a year. That's kind of like, to me, like this other story I also found on CNN.com. Drug reduces drinking in people who became alcoholics at early age, researchers report. It's another one of those studies about these drugs that, supposedly make you not drunk if you drink them, or if you take them. And I don't know why people do all this study of these things, because what they don't get is that I didn't drink to not get drunk. Why bother? But it says, I like what they said here. It says alcoholic patients with an early onset of the disease, specifically before age 26. I took my first drink of alcohol at age 9. Tend to have a broad range of antisocial behavior, including high rates of childhood risk behavior, hostility, and earlier in life drinking problems compared with people who develop alcoholism at age 26 or older, the report said. What amazes me is that they've come up with this chemical compound, but then the very last 2 paragraphs are what were the kicker for me. Actually 3. It says only 2 drugs have been approved in the past half century to treat alcoholism. I know what one of them is. That's antabuse. It stop anybody from drinking? Although studies are underway on a number of others. Then it goes on to say the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism funded the study, which is good to know. Providing the drug was GlaxoSmithKline, a North Carolina pharmaceutical company reporting sales in 1999 of almost $5.8 billion. The company is a subsidiary of GlaxoSmithKline plc of London. For his research projects, Krasner, the doctor who did this study, is receiving financial report from Bristol Myers Squibb and other commercial drug firms. Go figure. You know what they don't get is that I think it's in this doctor's opinion that we're talking about. Dr. Silkworth noted that we drink alcohol because of the way it makes us feel. And that, to me, it's almost like a useless exercise to go around trying to come up with medicines that don't make me feel that way, because why do I bother? Wanted to introduce you all to a fellow. His picture's right here on the podium. This is Dr. William Duncan Silkworth, medical doctor. He was a neurologist, which means he studied the physiology of nerves. Basically, he was a psychiatrist, and in some of our AA literature, it says that he was a well-known doctor. He was the medical director of Towns Hospital in New York City. Towns Hospital is located, or was located, in Lower Manhattan. I believe somewhere right around like 23rd Street-ish or something like that was what I had read somewhere. Dr. Silkworth was basically, for whatever reason, he loved drunks. And there are stories that said that he treated as many as 51,000 drunks in his lifetime. Now, I want to draw an interesting parallel between Dr. Silkworth and this fellow who did the research on this new drug, his patient study consisted of 321 patients in the first screening, of which 158 completed the 12-week study. We alcoholics tend to finish everything we start because not drinking was not a requirement at the entry to that. But anyway, Dr. Silkworth treated about 51,000 alcoholics. You would think that after that amount of time, he might have noticed a thing or two about us. And it broke his heart to see alcoholics get drunk. When he died, Bill Wilson, in his eulogy of Dr. Silkworth, said that he thought, he wasn't sure, and he probably figured that Dr. Silkworth would be a little mad to hear this, but he thought that God gave Alcoholics Anonymous to Dr. Silkworth as a reward for all the work that he did treating alcoholics. He had a special place in his heart for drunks. He loved drunks. You might ask, why do we have a couple of alcoholics up here talking about doctor stuff? Because I am not a doctor, although I certainly medicated myself as one for many years. I am not a lawyer, although I got here one with me. He's a darn good one, too, let me tell you. But I found something. I don't know if you all have ever seen this book, Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. If you haven't read the other AA literature, you're kind of missing out on stuff. And AA Comes of Age was written in, about 1950, I guess, at the time when we adopted the traditions and the foundation was basically turned over. The operations of Alcoholics Anonymous was turned over to Alcoholics Anonymous from the Alcoholic Foundation. Before that period of time, they had always had one more non-drinker, non-alcoholic on the board than alcoholic on the board, just in case we all got drunk. And, you can imagine what a mess that might be. Anyway, this book came out, and there's a bunch of neat stuff. Bill talks in a lot of depth about talking with Ebby, the day that he and Ebby got together. But he talks in here, he says, I like this, it says, this sort of explains to me why it might be helpful to have alcoholics talking about what the doctor's talking about. He says, complete hopelessness and deflation at depth were almost always required to make the patient ready. And both Dr. Young had noticed that, and some other doctors, some other psychiatrists had noticed that we had a little bit of an ego streak running down our back. And that it wasn't until we had complete deflation that we were willing to possibly recognize the fact that we had a real problem. And that was exactly what happened to me. Then Ebby, as an alcoholic, handed me the identical dose. In other words, an alcoholic walked in and said, until you give up, you ain't going to get it. And he laid it on the table and he said, this is what's wrong with us. On Dr. Silkworth's say-so alone, maybe I would have never completely accepted the verdict. But when Ebby came along and one alcoholic began to talk to another, that clinched it. Okay? The magic combination was the medical doctor said, guys, you are doomed. And then the drunk said, and this is what we did to get there. And I don't know if you all could relate to Kevin tonight, but man, I could. I was drinking a quart of Evan Williams a day when I got here. But I wasn't an alcoholic because the alcoholic was the guy across the street from me. Literally, I watched the man die of alcoholism. He lived directly across the street. I lived in a condo complex in Smyrna, and this man came home every night. He sort of swerved his car into the driveway, and he walked in with his brown bag. I wasn't an alcoholic because I carried my bottle into the house inside my briefcase. I wasn't an alcoholic. In 1934, in the summer of 1934, and many of us have seen this scene played out in My Name is Bill W., the wonderful story with James Woods and James Garner. Bill Wilson gets the treatment. He gets the medicine from Dr. Silkworth. So about the middle of the summer of 1934, I lay in Charles B. Towns Hospital on Central Park West. Okay, so it's a little further uptown. I'd been there before. I met dear old Dr. Silkworth. He had thought at one time that I might recover. He thought every one of the 51,000 drunks that he was treating could recover but it broke his heart every time one of them died of alcoholism. But I had gone steadily downhill, and now I lay upstairs in the hospital knowing for the first time that I was utterly hopeless. Lois was downstairs, and this kind old doctor was trying in his gentle way, he was a very gentle man by all reports, to tell her the bad news that so many wives and husbands had received. He was trying to tell her that what was wrong with me was that I was hopeless. And Lois was exclaiming, "But Bill has a tremendous amount of willpower. You never saw such an obstinate man when he sets his heart on something. He has tried desperately to get well. We've tried everything. Doctor, why can't he stop?" The gentle little man explained that my drinking, once a habit, had become an obsession, a true insanity that condemned me to drink against my will. And she said, "Doctor, what can we do?" So he had to tell her that I would have to be locked up, go mad, or die. Upstairs, I knew the story. It was the end of the long road. It was the end of the long road. And that's what I was faced with on December 2nd, 1990. My ex-wife found some bottles. I could really relate to, anybody see Lost Weekend with Ray Milland? Yeah. That's one of my favorite movies now. I love that movie because, see, I hid bottles. I hid bottles from myself. My wife would go out of town for a week, and first thing I'd do is I'd hide the bottles. Like, what's she going to do, walk in the door? In the fall of 1935, we all know the story. Bill gets visited by Abby Thatcher, brings in the message of the Oxford groups. There's really a neat story in here. I'm not going to read it because we don't have the time, but there's a great story about Bill visiting an Oxford group meeting. Actually, Sam Shoemaker, who was head of the Oxford groups, in a mission in downtown New York. It's the kind of place that I thought Alcoholics Anonymous was. My vision of Alcoholics Anonymous was always the three-penny opera kind. That is, a guy sitting around in the trench coats, sitting on the benches. Anyway, there's a great story about that. But Bill basically realizes at this mission meeting that there might be some spiritual help, and that the message that Abby had given to him a few days earlier started to sink in. So Bill goes on his last drunk, and it's quite a debauch. He's supposed to be going to play golf with the guy. He ends up getting home with his head cracked open, leaning against the door grate of the home. Lois opens the door. He's standing there with the strap to his golf bag, and that's all that's left. He was supposed to be going to play golf. Right? So he did just like I did. He said, "Man, there may be something wrong here." So he says, and he realized, alcoholism, not cancer, was my illness. But what was the difference? Was not alcoholism also a consumer of body and mind? Alcoholism took longer to do its killing, but the result was the same. So if there was a great physician, and that's what he had heard from Evie, who could cure the alcoholic sickness, I had better seek him now at once. I had better find what my friend had found. Would I, like the cancer sufferer, do anything to get well? If that required me to pray at high noon in the public square with other sufferers, I would follow my pride. Would I swallow my pride and do that? Maybe I would. Meanwhile, though, I would go back to Towns Hospital where Dr. Silkworth would sober me up again. Somebody fix me. Somebody fix me. Then I could look clear-eyed at Debbie's formula for sobriety. Perhaps I would need an emotional conversion. Maybe a conservative doubter like me could get by without having to do anything like that. Always looking for that out. Anyhow, I started for the hospital. Walking up Clinton Street to the subway, I fished 6 cents out of my pocket. A nickel would get me to the hospital, but hadn't I forgotten something? Here I was on my way to get cured. Typical alcoholic that I was, I figured I might as well get comfortable until the hospital took over. So I stepped into a grocery store where I had slim credit. I remember explaining to the clerk that I was an alcoholic on my way to be cured. Could I have 4 bottles of beer on the cuff? Can you imagine that? Walking to the hey, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm about to go get cured. Can I have 4 bottles of beer? I drank 1 bottle on the street and another in the subway. My spirits rose as I offered a third to a passenger. God almighty, I've been on the New York subways, and I've been offered a beer before. He turned down my refreshment, so I drained that bottle on the station platform next to the hospital. Holding the last bottle of the neck, I walked into Towns where Dr. Silkworth met me in the hall. Now, in very high spirits, I waved the bottle and shouted, "At last, Doc, I've found something." Even through my haze, I could see the good old man's face fall. I know now how much he loved me. This fresh outburst really hurt him. I tried to explain the new thing that I thought I had found. He looked at me, shaking his head, and after a while he quietly said, "Well, my boy, isn't it time you went upstairs and went to bed?" Dr. Silkworth had an incredible patience with drug addicts and alcoholics. He treated both. He saw that the whole mess, he identified, he was one of the first medical doctors to identify the fact that alcoholism is an allergy. We were talking about that driving over here tonight, this afternoon, as we come over. When I was a kid, I grew up with hay fever. And actually Dr. Silkworth, in one of his papers on this, one of his medical papers, talked about how people who suffer with hay fever can go years and years and years without being affected by whatever the substance is, like that yellow stuff that we always have in March when we're down here or whatever. Years and years and years, and all of a sudden, just like that, it triggers, it goes off. He says the alcoholic is the same way. He says he doesn't know why the alcoholic, some people have the manifestation of the allergy at the very onset. Some people go for years and years and years, and then they cross that red line. And he really didn't understand it, and in fact they have done some studies since that have talked about the metabolism and how alcohol turns into, what is it, I think Joe and Charlie said it turns into formaldehyde? Acetone, thank you, in our bodies. It breaks down. There's a chemical process that it breaks down. And what happens when it breaks down is it sets forth an allergic reaction. And that allergic reaction in the alcoholic is the craving for more alcohol. One of my favorite buddies in the fraternity house when I was in college was a guy who used to say to me, "Let's go up to Spiro's," which is the local bar near campus. He said, "Let's go up to Spiro's and have a beer or 10. I can honest to God remember the one time in my life that I know for a fact I took one drink. And that was the night when my wife had been on a business trip to Washington, and I had come up on Friday to visit. We were going to do the tourist thing, right? And so we were going to this nice dinner at the hotel Friday night, and she says, "Just have one drink." And I was cornered. I had no out. I couldn't just slip away and get something. I had the one drink. And it was a miserable night. Miserable night. I never drank one drink. Like I said, when I got here, I was drinking Evan Williams by the quart. That is not social drinking. And I drank it sitting on my sofa by myself. I was not a bar drinker towards the end. Except when I would go down to places like the Cheetah Tree and talk to the ladies about God and stuff dollar bills in there. But that's a different fifth step. Dr. Silkworth wrote a series of medical papers. He wrote two papers in 1937. One was published in March and one was published in April. The one published in March is titled "Alcoholism as a Manifestation of Allergy." And then the other paper is titled "Reclamation of the Alcoholic." And basically he talks about the two parts of the disease. He says basically alcoholics have an allergic reaction to alcohol, and that the only solution to that is to not take in any alcohol. If we were just normal people, that would be just fine, Don't drink. You'll be okay. The problem is that he also observed as a psychiatrist that there's an obsession, that we're also obsessive types. We also tend to be manic, depressive types in general. Basically, we're crazy. And that the one thing that our disease tells us is that we don't have it. And he noticed that almost in every alcoholic, we don't have it. And he said the only solution to that whole mess is what they called at the time moral psychology. Now that's a goofy sounding set of words, but basically morals, if you hadn't heard this before, like in the steps we talk about in the morning, it says we took a fearless and searching moral inventory. Morals have to do with man's relationship with God, spirit. And ethics has to do with man's relationship to man. If you ever wondered where that comes from, that's sort of the difference. Ethics is how we deal with each other. Morals is how we deal with God. So when he talked about moral psychology, he was going way out on a limb. Because here is a medical doctor. He hasn't got any pills that he can give us. He hasn't got any of this transformation, any of this stuff that Carl Jung had come up with, or that Freud or any of these guys had come up with. He couldn't fix us. 51,000 alcoholics. He couldn't fix us. He said the only solution that he'd seen was in a few alcoholics they had found spiritual help. They had had a psychic change. And that was his observation as a medical doctor. And that's what he talks about in the second paper. These two papers, written in 1937, then were sort of trimmed down into a single paper published in 1939, also about the alcoholic, which then became the basic text for the doctor's opinion in the front matter, the XX, II, IIV stuff in the big book. By the way, if you're doing a book study on this stuff, there's a caveat, there's a gotcha. I didn't realize this until I started doing a book study with some guys this year, that when in the 4th edition, they add a foreword, which throws off all the XXIVII stuff. So if you say, well, we're on XXVIII, and he's on a different page. So it's just to be careful, because it does change, you know. They say the first 164 pages of the big book don't change. Well, yeah, they do a little bit, but the basic ideas are still there. I want to close with this. I shared about it in the early bird meeting, but I'm going to offer it to y'all because it's been a tremendous gift that was offered to me. Last spring when Scott Lee was here, he I don't know if y'all heard it, but he said, he made a great suggestion, which I took home and I grabbed hold of, and that for me was read 2 pages of the big book every day. Now, I'm like most alcoholics. I get all charged up. I'm going to read them. Well, most of the time I'm sitting here reading 449. I'm reading my favorite page 25. I'm reading all this stuff. And, somewhere around we agnostics, I start to forget the fact that I had made this commitment to read the big book again. So he said, read 2 pages a day. Well, I made the decision that I was going to do that. Now, Dr. Silkworth in his paper on the reclamation of the alcoholic draws the difference between making a decision and making a pledge or we make all these promises and things. And what I had made was a promise to myself. I made a decision that part of my recovery was going to be 2 pages of the big book every day. Let me tell you what happened as a result of that. First of all, I'm on my 3rd pass through the big book. And there's stuff that I didn't know was written in there. That's amazing. And every time you read it, I think there's more stuff. But more amazingly, I was asked to be part of a book study at a halfway house. And I've met some of the most interesting people I've ever met before. And the one thing that I guarantee you will get by teaching the big book is you will learn the big book. And one day at a time, you'll get the opportunity to stay sober today. That's the reward, is to stay sober today. I'm going to turn the podium over to my good friend Jule, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the doctor's opinion. He's going to go into some detail about some of the papers that Dr. Silkworth wrote and some of the material. I think he's going to go at it. He's going to talk about the big book. And then after all of that, we're going to break up into some groups and we're going to do some book study on this whole stuff, okay? Thanks for letting me share.
I tell you what, boy, it's hard to follow a straight man. Darn .com is about to take over everything. My name's Jule. I'm an alcoholic. And talk about the doctor's opinion in the context of book study. We wanted to talk a little bit about who Dr. Silkworth was, and Mike went out and did some real good research on Dr. Silkworth. And as a matter of fact, those 2 papers that he found, I really didn't know they existed until he showed them to me in our research and preparing for this. So it's amazing all of the background and contextual stuff that kind of fits in with what's going on here. And even Bill's story and the Oxford group and the Ebby Thatcher stuff, all of that happened on the way to the first publication of the big book. All of that kind of stuff just kind of rolled up historically into when they got down to the point where there were 100 recovered alcoholics that had come to ask Dr. Silkworth to contribute to the big book. And what you see, where's that big book with them 2 pages you read every, yeah. This, what you see when you get to Dr. Silkworth, I do a book study every Thursday at Grace Recovery, and I always say in the book study there is that we go only as fast as the slowest man, which means I spend a lot of time in the table of contents of the big book, showing how the big book is structured. The big book is structured in a very cool kind of way for an alcoholic. And if you look at the structure of the contents, you see the preface, and then you see the forwards. And I always explain that the forwards are kind of historical stuff, telling you how we got to this point. You know, every book with a forward tells you how we got to this point. We now have 4 editions of the big book, so we got 4 forwards. And the most recent forward talks about internet meetings and things of that nature. And when the first forward was written, we hadn't even gone to the moon yet. They talked about how amazing it would be to do that kind of stuff. But now we have digital meetings, we have e-meetings, we have all kinds of stuff that's just following the times. And by the time the big book is published the 5th time, there will be something else there that wasn't there when the 4th edition was written. Then after the forwards, the first thing you see is the doctor's opinion. And I always point out that the doctor's opinion, in my humble estimation, is the first definitive definition of what alcoholism really is about, the mechanism of alcoholism. And that's real important. You know, if you are going to diagnose an illness, you have to first define what the illness is. Okay? And then, right after that, in the big book, and we'll go back to Dr. Silkworth's opinion, but right after that is the clinical example of how you then go about diagnosing the illness that you defined in the doctor's opinion. And so in just talking about the big book, and what we're trying to do is encourage the study of the big book and encourage sharing what we find out about the big book. A lot of things happen out here at Rock Eagle. And one of the things that happen out here, this is a workshop, number one. It's a workshop. And we come out here to learn how to work. You know, we learn how to share our work when we go back. Most of us want to hurry up and go back and get back to town and get to our little meetings with the 3 sick people on the side and get them all straightened out, by Thursday. You know what I mean? And that's all well and good. But there's somebody going to want to know the real deal. And they're going to want to know from you. Okay, see, one of the special things about the men that end up out here in the woods with us twice a year is that you're probably some of the most enthusiastic and committed recovering people in your sorted communities about the country. Most people look up to you or look over at you. However, my sponsor back in the day, Mr. Jim Pearson, would always say, look over at you, not up at you, because we don't do good at looking up and down. Looking over is pretty cool. But look over at you and they'll know you done been exposed to some stuff, and they're gonna want you to help them, and you gotta help them right. Okay, and part of this helping right thing is looking at the big book, being able to know some context, understand some things about it, and the series that we're gonna try to introduce to you over a period of time is various chapters in the big book and where they sit and why they sit there. And right in this particular time, we're going to be talking about the doctor's opinion. It's a definition of alcoholism. And when I came in here, they had told me I had it. It's like telling you got crabs and telling you done stepped in doo-doo. You go, so, okay, I got it. What do you do now? What do you do now? Please. What do you do? I needed a system of how to approach this. Some of us come in here pretty confused, but we got a little bit of smarts with us, or we think we do anyway. You just need a little guidance. That's why they have sponsors waiting at the door for us. You know what I mean? They come on, I'm gonna show you how to do this. And somebody gonna ask you to do it, and it's no way in the world to, Dr. Silkworth was one of these people, just like Bill almost, that was divinely given to us. He actually witnessed the first miracle. And one of the other things I want to suggest to you in the future, when you come to a big book study, bring a big book. Bring one with you, right, Dennis? Where you? That's all right. But what I have done, I don't have enough of them for everybody, but I have some here, and in the breakouts we'll share a little bit. Let's talk about, let me give you one, Dennis. Let's talk about what Dr. Silkworth delivers to us in the big book. He actually witnessed the miracle that occurred in Bill. He actually witnessed it, and it's very poignant how he put it. In the course of his third treatment of this guy had went to treatment 3 times. Back then, that's a big deal, okay? This guy acquired a certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. Now, I kind of break this down into a little more figuratism, and, you know, actually, in my eyes, Bill was put in a rubber room for the 3rd time. And just like Mike was talking about, he was trying to explain to his wife how hopeless he was. But while he was in that rubber room, something happened. And he came out of the rubber room, went to Dr. Silkworth, and said, "Hey, man, I need to talk to some more drunks." That just came out of nowhere. But Dr. Silkworth saw it happen, because that's the guy who he came to and said, "Hey, man, I want to talk to another drunk." And Dr. Silkworth, I mean, can you imagine now? This guy's on the verge of telling your wife that you're hopeless. I mean, he puts it in the book. I came to regard this type of alcoholic as hopeless. And he comes out of the rubber room and says, "Doc, I want to talk to another drunk." What do you think he does? He says, "Okay, go ahead. Do what you want to do. You're going to die. You're hopeless. Go right ahead. Please, try whatever you need to try. I can't help you, bro." You know? That's what he did. I mean, it wasn't nothing, you know, spiritual about that. I mean, you know, noticeably spiritual anyway. It was just at the moment, you know. I mean, back then they didn't have, you know, retreats where hundreds of guys working on alcoholism just voluntarily went. This guy came out of a rubber room saying, "Doc, I need to talk to another drunk." He said, "Okay, go ahead." But then something else happened. The guy stopped drinking because he was talking to more drunks. And the doctor, you know, doctor's a scientist. Dr. Silkworth is a scientist. He had observed this. You know, and that's one of the blessings of Dr. Silkworth, is that he had observed it scientifically occur. And he documented it. It had been documenting it. And then he saw this miracle. And he documented it. You know? That's what he did. And when they got to the point where they wanted to write the book, you know, it's guys around us that are just spiritually loving people that you will always love, and you will always want them to be a part of your success. And after this guy that came out of the rubber room that I asked to speak to, a drunk, had acquired a number of colleagues, about 100 colleagues, who had been successful at avoiding this craving and relieved this obsession to the extent that the doctor would consider them recovered. They were writing about what had happened. They were compiling their experiences so as to even go further with it. And they came back to the doctor and said, "Doc, we really have a lot of respect for you. You know who you understand us." That's another one of them great ingredients to beginning a recovery, is that there must be someone that understands. And who better to understand than us? And who do we love? The people that understand. And they knew that Dr. Silkworth understood. So they asked him to put his piece in the book. Okay? And all Dr. Silkworth did was document scientifically what he had observed. It was a great place for him to be able to put his piece. Because now he's not talking to his colleagues, as in the other 2 papers, his intellectual and scientific colleagues, who he's trying to convince that there is a way to save an alcoholic, because he was seeing bits and pieces of it. And then after the first 100 started, he started being encouraged. And he started trying to tell his buddies that, look, these guys are actually beginning to get well. But nobody was listening. It was just academic fodder. You know how you publish a paper on how to get to a meal with a mate and watch it and make it look pretty, and they got it going on and they send them in space, and nobody wants to hear that gibberish. You know, none of the other scientists want to listen, especially if they're in denial about their own alcoholism. You know? So it wasn't getting nowhere with them. And these guys came back and they're finna write a book. You know, I got a buddy out here, David. David, you know, he's, you know, in my mind, he's one of these intellectual guys. He's right here among us. He's writing a book. Okay? So what? Bill and wrote a book. You know, and they were writing a book. And they were inspired to write this book and begin to pass the message on. Okay? They were wanting to tell about the miracle. Go back to the rubber room. Go back to the drunk coming out. The first guy the drunk walks into when he comes out is this guy. I want to talk to some old drunk. He said, try it. Let's see what happens. And he observed 100 of them begin to recover. And now they want to write a book, and they want him to put his stuff in it. So don't you know that this doctor wanted to take full advantage of his opportunity to define alcoholism to those who would need it most? His chance to, for posterity, document the definition of alcoholism for us, not for his medical colleagues, not for his academic friends, but for us. And it's right there in the front of the book, right after the forwards. So when I got here in 1986, January 31, I came to my first rock in February of that same year. And there are very few men here that were there then. One of them sitting right here, Mr. D. Another one back there. Me and Neil, I think, came the same time. But Skip back there, that's right, Skip, you came with us. You came from Roanoke, and that's why we got the Roanoke connection. But when I got here in January 1986, I had not had a clue of what I was supposed to be doing. They had put me in a little community of people that wouldn't let me go no place by myself for 2 weeks. You know, I had to sneak and call my wife. And if I called her too many times, they were going to put me out. I had to go to 3 of these darn meetings a week, and I had to get a sponsor. Now, I'm from the hood. A sponsor supposed to pay your way. I ain't seen nobody I had guts enough to ask to do that. But I saw the guy that was going to be my sponsor standing up here, probably at this very podium. I'm talking about sponsorship. I got him to be my sponsor. Then he sat me down and he said, we're going to work on what's killing you. What's killing you is alcoholism. And he got the cure right here, and he showed me a book. He said, I want you to read the first 164 pages and call me. And one of the first things I read was the doctor's opinion. And then the next thing we did was talk about the doctor's opinion. And he told me that was the definition of alcoholism. You know, I'm a college-educated man. I done read a lot of stuff. I was beat down by this disease. This disease is almost like, you know, a big giant horsefly buzzing around you, biting you whenever it gets ready, and you're just too slow to catch it. And that's what it was doing to me, and I was beginning to suffer some serious wounds from the biting. And my sponsor defined that for me. Gave me a chance to understand what was happening to me. I think somewhere in the doctor's opinion, they call it a special kind of suffering that only we understand each other have. I can't find it, but it's a particular kind of suffering that only we know. It's a nightmarish kind of suffering that only we know. Okay, and it was a little relief to understand that there was a method to the nightmare, that I might be able to wake up some kind of way. Because if it's a definition of it, it's a solution to it. And that gave me my first glimmer of hope. You know, okay, now, because there is a definition of alcoholism, doesn't necessarily mean that it apply to me. I mean, you know, I'm the great guy of denial. You know, my wife the commercial used to say, if you need help from alcoholism, if you don't get it from us, get help somewhere, right? I used to go out and say, and come back and tell my wife that the places that they wanted me to get help from cost too much money. And I hadn't even been, but I knew she was a cheapskate, so if I told her that, she'd leave me alone. It costs too much money, fine, save your money. We'll figure out another way to save you. We'll wrap you up, in one of the mummy suits that our friend Jimmy used to talk about. Anything to keep you from drinking. If it costs too much, we'll come up with a discount plan. But I had no active way of coping with my disease. I didn't know what it was. I saw my granddaddy suffer. I saw my daddy suffer. And I saw countless friends suffer. I saw countless ones of their friends suffer. I did think it was moral weakness. I did think it was badness. I did think I was, as one of my friends used to say, snake bit. Roland Bryce would say snake bit. And couldn't get nothing right. Left home with the best intentions. Couldn't never get it done right. Couldn't get it done right. And now they give us a definition. A definition is a good place to start. Let me tell you, gentlemen, if you have people that want you to help them with this disease, the best thing you could do is help them to understand the phenomenon of craving, because it's undeniably understandable to an alcoholic. If he got what we got and you discuss the phenomenon of craving, he will understand. He might not yet be able to do anything about it, but he will now know. The ignorant okie doke is over. Now it's informed okie doke. Okay? We now talk about informed okie doke once you understand that you suffer from the phenomena of craving coupled with an obsession. And one of the other things that Dr. Silkworth talks about is, and some of the stuff that's happening now, even in formalized treatment, is the physical attachment that we have to our disease. Not only the emotional and actually spiritual attachment that we have to our disease, but we do in fact have to be detoxified. We have to get this stuff off of us. Everything, us who crave substances have to get them off of us before we can realize any kind of success at treating it. We have to get it off of us. That's why they tell you to stay clean. Stay clean. Get it off you. Because once it gets you, you're gone again. And, talk about the phenomenon of craving. Like, or the allergy as if, some allergies manifest themselves in itching. And sometimes if you itch and you scratch, it goes away. But if you have the phenomenon, if you have this allergy that manifests itself in itching coupled with an obsession, the more you scratch it, the more you need to scratch it. So you could just be scratching. And the more you scratch, the better it feels. And the better it feels, the more you scratch. And then you start gouging, chunks of meat out you, but you can't stop. That's what makes it so bad for us, because we can't stop. That's serious business. To not be, you've ever been in a car that couldn't stop? You mash the brakes and they go faster. It might be funny for a second or two. But that shit gets kind of serious after a minute. You start running over shit and, you start killing folk to save your own life. And that's what drunks do, man. You be destroying lives because you're obsessed, can't stop. And to know this is a breath of fresh air for a suffering drunk. To know this, to understand this, is a breath of fresh air for a suffering drunk. It's a start. It ain't the end. You don't get to the end. You don't get here and be done with it. To know that if you start scratching, you can't stop. Or, like Siegel is doing, if you got the phenomenon, if you get digging in your nose as an allergy and then you can't stop, you've been stuck a hole in your brain before you can stop. You've been to hurt somebody. Just imagine that, man. And you can't, that obsession to do it won't let you anything. Anything, man. You know. I mean, I got a buddy, we got to feeling good about bowling, man. We went on a bowling binge. We bowled all over the metropolitan area of Atlanta. We bowled, now I can't stand a bowling ball. But we got to going, man. You know, two drunk junkies, man, that had a little bit of clean time, couldn't do nothing else, man. We was out all night, wives were mad, just the same old good stuff, you know, just bowling. Wasn't even liquor, wasn't even dough, it was just bowling. We bowled ourselves into the doghouse. It felt kind of good, we wasn't high. You know, it don't cost as much to bowl either. Just gotta remember to give them back the shoes before you leave. But I strongly, now what we're going to try to do, guys, is if you want, you know, it's almost midnight, it's, 5 to 11, and some of us, don't hang as well as we used to, and I say us inclusively, you know, but, we'd like to break off in a few groups, a couple of groups, 2 or 3 groups. If you want to talk about specifically some of the text in the doctor's opinion, we'd be more than happy to do that for a minute. What I'd ask is that we form a couple of circles, get kind of intimate so we could talk about it. Mike will take one group and I'll take the other. And we'll sit here and we'll talk about it for a minute. I have about 20 of these things. I should have got more. I don't know why I didn't think we would need more than this. But we got them. And, you know, actually, if you got a big book, just go get it and bring back that. You know, go get it and flip to the page called The Doctor's Opinion, and we can talk in depth about it. What we really want to do is, you know, get a rhythm going, you know, from retreat to retreat, every other retreat or so, where we study some of the text of our big book and take some understanding back to our respective groups and communities and halfway houses or wherever we are, instead of just, you know, conjecture and what I think and what some sponsor that ain't never read the damn thing told me about, you know. So,
what if we break into 4 groups?
That's fine. However we want to do it. We probably will need about 4 groups. So we have a couple other guys here that, if they want, could kind of help lead a group for us. And we'll do that for a few minutes or for however long, you guys could go without nodding out. How about that? I'd like to thank y'all very much.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.